Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another video. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by activist, author, Virgie Tovar. Hi, Virgie.
Hi.
Okay, so before we jump into it, let's give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
I actually met you at Laverne Cox's birthday party, and I, went by myself. My friends have real jobs and they couldn't come, and I was just kind of like, seeing certain people, and a couple people followed me and came up to me, and I was like, oh, thank God, like people know me. But then I saw you. Like that is the benefit of being an online person. Like people,
You always have a friend at a party.
like somebody. And then I remember walking past you and being like, I know that face. Like, who is that? And I remember because I've been doing research recently around the difference between body positivity and fat liberation and fat acceptance. And I just read You Have the Right to Remain Fat. And I was like, that is Virgie. Like, that is her. And so, of course, I walked up to you and we had a great little powwow at the party. So it was so good to meet you there.
Yeah, same. It was so good to cozy up and have a chat with you, actually. You looked amazing, and you look amazing now.
Oh, thank you. I love a theme, Oh, and you know what? We're going to get to this because I was reading your book and you called yourself a fashionista. So we're going to get to the aesthetic part of the program. But before we really jump into it, how would you describe the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of different things, but it's all under the umbrella of ending weight discrimination. Like weight discrimination is a really, or otherwise known as fat phobia or anti-fatness. It really is a very virulent, insidious, and very common form of bigotry in the United States and really beyond. So, most Americans, like 70% of Americans, are actually in bigger bodies or plus size. And yet there is this sort of belief that being in a larger body is a negative thing, and that it has all kinds of impacts from, like there's a wage gap between plus size and straight size women. There's a difference in the medical care that plus size people receive. There's less availability in the fashion world the larger your body is. And so there's a lot of fallout for it. And my job is sort of to teach people about it, to help them, eradicate it and develop tools so they're not perpetuating it. And for the people who have experienced the fallout, it's helping them heal and learning tools about empowerment and educating them on the fact that like they're experiencing bigotry and this is what they can do about it.
Yeah, I think that this is really important. And this is a point that trips people up a lot of times because when we're talking about fat phobia, when we're talking about weight discrimination, or honestly any kind of bigotry, particularly when it intertwines with desirability politics, people are like, well, I just like what I like, like I can't have preferences. And it's like, whatever, like actually your preferences are problematic, but really what we're trying to underscore is how this perpetuates a structural inequality that impacts people's life chances and outcomes and stops them from getting housing and work, and all of the things that you're talking about, right? It's not just like dates, it's like, can you live?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're really getting into, like, I often teach people there's like 3 dimensions to understanding fat phobia. There's the intrapersonal, how you feel about yourself, the interpersonal, how other people treat you based on your body, and the institutional, like how easily or not easily you can navigate society. And I think really there's research that shows that weight discrimination, in fact, shortens life expectancy, like controlling for common psychological and physical risk factors, that it's actually discrimination and the ongoing experience of stress that leads to shortened life expectancy. And we see this across, to your point, we see this across marginalized groups. Like in general, marginalized groups live shorter lives, have more health issues, have a weakened immune system because there's a sense of kind of that constant fight or flight,
Yeah, chronic stress is absolutely a killer, 100%. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you because I thought that You Have the Right to Remain Fat was a great book. I thought it was so well written. I thought it was thoughtful. I thought your writing style was really engaging. And I'm a tough critic, I'll be honest, okay? Like everybody doesn't
I love it. Thank you.
And truly, even from the introduction, I was like, oh, I recognize this as somebody who's battled all kinds of body dysmorphia, eating disorders, from anorexia to binge eating disorder. Like, I just thought it was really, really useful. I reread in the introduction you talking about your fond memories of being like a carefree child and delighting in your jiggly body and not having any frame of reference for how other people were disgusted by it or disappointed in you, or how it set you aside from other people. And just rereading that really made me feel a little bit of a sense of grief, because I don't even know if I remember clearly, distinctly, a time before I was super self aware of the fact that my body, that I felt big in my body, that I felt like my thighs were too big or my butt was too big or other people were skinny and beautiful and I wasn't. And I thought, oh, like, that makes me sad for childhood Kimberly. And it really reminds me that so many of us have very, very little remembrance of just being and delighting and just being free.
Yeah, I had repressed those memories until several years into my own kind of like fat liberation process. I had stopped dieting. I was learning how to love and accept my body. I was learning the history of fat activism, which goes all the way back to the 60s. And it wasn't until a few years into that whole process that I remembered, because like I think for a lot of us, we have our brains hold those memories,
Yeah.
but we repress them because of cognitive dissonance, right? It's like, how can I reconcile the world I live in now, the reality of my life now, the culture that I live in now, with the memory of being free?
Yeah.
You know, and I think honestly, it's like a way that our souls like protect ourselves from
Yeah.
that like devastation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that you're 100% spot on. And some of the most formative memories that I have about my body and my burgeoning relationship to it when I was, I want to say 8, 9, 10. I remember going through puberty. I went through puberty early, and the only like other black kids on our street, like we were like playing with them, and one of the boys was like, well, you're fat. And I was like 9. And I just remember being like, I'm fat? Like, you know? And it's just so crazy that I can't remember like what my childhood bedroom looked like, but I can so distinctly remember standing on my front porch and having that kid, and he was maybe 10 or 11, saying to me like, well, that's fine because you're fat. And now, you know, and that just like stuck. And so you so vividly recounting all of these kind of traumatic experiences, these formative experiences, really helped unlock in me some of those memories. And I'm sure people are always telling you like, this happened to me, this happened to me, like I remember this.
Yes, totally. Well, and I think, I want to say to that experience that you had, like, fat is kind of, it's almost like a smokescreen or a red herring, or I think of it as like a catch-all or a dog whistle word. It kind of, I mean, it encapsulates a lot, like so for example, that person who said that to you, he might be talking about your body.
Right.
He might just be using a word that he knows is going to end the conversation immediately. That word also, like when it comes to gender, right? It's a word that says you're not even really a girl.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, there's a lot of when I say catch-all, I mean, the word fat is one of like, fat phobia is such a socially accepted form of bigotry. Even now, we've made a lot of progress, I would say, but like, even now it's still a socially acceptable form of bigotry. And what's complicated about those kinds of socially acceptable forms of bigotry is that those words go on to be about everything that we have unresolved, right? Like, so I can't, like, he might not go out, like, maybe if it was like the 1930s, he might just say, well, you play like a girl.
Yeah.
And you would immediately be ashamed because you would have been taught at that time that it's shameful to be a girl. And I think right now fatness has that same thing where it's like, this could be about class, this could be about race, this could be about gender, this could be about, like, I don't like you. And it just kind of, it's like, it like ends. And I think because people understand this word, like they understand fatness as a death sentence socially, right? Because certainly the research shows how socially isolated higher weight people can really be. We immediately hear that word, and it's not just a commentary on like, oh, I don't look the way I'm supposed to look. It's like, oh my God, I'm not even like a desired citizen of my own country or my own world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that this is something you articulated so well in the book. It's not just that people don't want themselves to be fat, that we are constantly surveilling ourselves and policing ourselves, and I can't eat this and I have to eat that. Is that people are disgusted by the existence of fat people. And that gets underscored in like, fat people you don't even deserve to take up any space. You don't deserve to be here. You don't deserve friends. You don't deserve care or companionship. Like, any kind of way that we can ostracize you, you deserve. It's your fault because you refuse to discipline your body in the way that we socially deem acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, it is really interesting to kind of think about how, I'm immediately like thinking of, right, there's the research shows like the Center for Disease Control, for example, you can look it up on their website, like overall in general, right? Like our personal, like our health as individuals is largely comprised of factors that are outside of our control. Most of them are socially determined. So it's like, do you have access to medical care? Have you experienced trauma or abuse as a child? Like these are things that you can't control, and that are largely determined by, frankly, like a lot of it is determined by policy,
Right.
like, just people in Washington, D.C. making a lot of these choices, like whether or not we have universal medical care is outside of our hands in a lot of ways. And so, right, like what remains, so 70% of our overall health is actually those factors, like largely determined by national policy. And then the remaining 30%, most of that is genetics. Yeah. So I think, and we live in a country where the history is really entrenched in bootstrapping, right? It's like anything that's wrong with what's happening with you, it's 100% your fault. You absolutely should control it. And we see this very obviously in economics and like how people talk about money. But it also shows up in how people talk about health outcomes. And so I think it is really interesting that there's this, the truly, right, fat phobia gets rationalized through the language of health. And yet when you kind of get into the research, it's very clear that like not only is stigma the probably the biggest issue when it comes to marginalized people. But in addition to that, like your overall health outcomes are largely determined by genetics and national policy. Like all these things are outside of our control. So it is really interesting to kind of like, I think that the casting or the idea of larger bodied people is like inherently unhealthy or inherently, less disciplined, et cetera, right? Like it's fascinating to me because I think, again, it really goes to show, like if you look at historical forms of bigotry that have been socially acceptable throughout the history of the United States, they're the exact same tropes.
Right.
There's not anything different. Like this idea of laziness or illness, this has been applied to women. This has been applied to people of color. Like it's not even new. Like they're not even creative. It's literally just like we just have different words and anxieties attached to these extremely problematic and dehumanizing things,
Yes. So there is like the myth of American exceptionalism means that we prize certain qualities. So are you industrious? Are you disciplined? Are you, all of these things? And then the opposite of those things, like you mentioned, gets projected onto anybody, whether fat, Black, person of color, right? Like anybody that is deemed to be like outside of like the American ideal, you're gonna get all of that shit like projected onto you for sure. I always tell people to read Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite books on this. And it just so clearly articulates like the very clear through line from anti-Blackness to fat phobia over the course of hundreds of years, and misogyny over the course of hundreds of years, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about something else you talked about in the book. You mentioned the connection between gender and anti-fatness, gender and fat phobia, feeling a kind of pressure to perform your gender a certain way because you live in a fat body. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, and this actually dates all the way back to how I started getting into this work. I got into this work because I was doing research in graduate school on how fat phobia impacted gender trajectory among fat women of color. So I was really, I mean, I was looking at the intersections of like gender, race, and size, but with a specific focus on gender. And so, and that research was inspired by the fact that growing up, I felt like I was neither a girl nor a boy. I mean, at that time, I understood gender as a binary, like a lot of children do, because we're taught that. So, I really felt like I was like, okay, I know I'm a girl because people call me, I have a girl name and I have long hair and, like what I mean, like I had kind of like some of the markers, but I think what was fascinating was none of the social side of femininity, which has a lot to do, unfortunately, actually with male attention and male attraction.
Mhm.
That part was not getting affirmed. So I had this, and I think it's interesting to think of gender. It's made up of a lot of different components. Like there's sort of an internal sense of like, this is who I am. And then there's an external, like social, like what is society sort of pinging back at me when I'm like trying to be feminine? What are they hitting the ball back or are they like, no,
Right.
you know?
Things are a social construct.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have question mark, but it's about how do you move through the world? How are you perceived? How are you treated, for sure.
Yes. And so for me, I think like as a fat girl, and I think there's a lot of race stuff in there that feels very hard to separate, like
Uh-huh.
as a brown girl, right? As an immigrant kid. I just was not like when I would put out there that like I'm a girl, I would not get the social like nod of like, yes, you are. And so I felt very confused. Like, I mean, examples are things like I always had to play the boy. Like when you're a kid and it's very like, it's very gender segregated. And it's like, you're only playing with girls and boys are only playing with boys that age, right? When I was only playing with girls and the book, we're enacting things like romance that we read about in books and stuff. But I always had to play the boy. It wasn't even discussed. There was not even like a conversation of like, today you're going to do this and you're going to like, I was always the boy. So that felt really frustrating. I was constantly longing to be able to like practice being the romantic, like the center of romantic attention. And I just never got to have that. Another example was like when we go shopping, right? Again, I know I'm a girl, but like nothing in the girl department fits me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, so what am I? And I'm shopping in the boys department because it's slightly larger. And I think like the final example really is like my male peers. I was watching them like, enact like childhood versions of like adulthood with some of my skinnier girlfriends. Like they would treat them like really delicate flowers. It would be really genteel and really like polite and all the stuff that I'd been taught that like this is how boys act when they like someone. And they treated me like I was like the shittiest boy that they knew, and so it was like, so there was just a lot of confusion. And then through adulthood, as I was like trying, as like coming into sexual debut, like none of my peers wanted to date me. I was completely off limits. I remember like a few people had crushes on me, but they weren't allowed to act on them because of like getting shit from other boys, basically. And then in adulthood, like feeling really barred from like access to romantic relationships, to again clothing that was feminine, and sort of like one of the ways that I really dealt with that sense of alienation was I was like, okay, I'm gonna double down on this. Like, I'm gonna be like the most feminine person as a way to kind of assert that that's my gender. And so like, I started wearing, especially coming after fat, like being introduced to fat activism. But even before that, I was just, I'm going to wear like the tightest clothes. I'm going to have the most cleavage. I'm going to have my nails done all the time. I'm always going to wear a dress. I'm always going to have long hair. I'm always going to wear lipstick. And it was interesting, like in the research that I did going back to grad school, like some of the participants went that same way. Like they had a really hyper feminine, assertive, almost aggressive gender expression. And then there were a number of the other people in the group had all leaned into kind of being masculine.
Yeah.
A lot of them were queer, and they found that like actually being coded as masculine gave them an advantage in dating, and their fatness was not like a strike against them as it would have been maybe if they were femme presenting. So like all of that is so interesting and like wild,
Yeah, no, I think that is so, I feel this racialized, in a racialized way. I felt that.
Yeah.
Younger, when in like kindergarten through maybe 11th grade of, like when the Spice Girls like were a thing, of course. And then like, what if I want to be Baby Spice? Like, what if I don't want to be Scary, right? And it's like, it's like a thing about like how Scary Spice, like, like that's racist, right? Like that, like Mel B like has to be, right? Or even really just coming to terms with like accepting that like elementary school, middle school, high school, like I'm not having a boyfriend. Like you can like, you talk to your friends about them, like having their first crushes and like having their first kiss at the movie theater. And it's like, just accepting that's not going to be me. Like it's cool. Or even, I read another book. Gosh, I can't remember what the name of it was recently. It was a book about heterosexuality, basically. And she was, outlining the researcher. I wish I could. Anybody who's watching this, I will link it down below. But she was saying that many young women who perceive themselves to not be sexually or romantically desirable double down on academic achievement or professional achievement in order to distract themselves from the fact that they are not able to have this outlet that is natural and normal and desirable, but also to prove themselves worthy of validation and other kinds of affection. And I definitely did that when I was younger, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I think and I think for me, it was also like having this particular kind of personality, like how being very like funny and effervescent. And I think it definitely maps onto like I have a pretty traumatic childhood background. So like all of it, I saw academic success slash, just like whatever success. I saw that as like a way out. I think a way out of my home, a way out of like my marginalized position. Like you know what I mean? It's like, obviously that's a bit of a trap, as I'm sure you know, like it's a bit of, because like, right, like we end up having more stress. That pushes us into industries that are full of people who aren't like us, and we might feel more alienated than like maybe people who come from the community we came from that like don't feel as alienated by it or something. So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it's like, I think it's kind of there's like two sides to the coin where I'm like, I feel really fulfilled in my career. And also I'm like extremely aware of the roles that like stigma and trauma have played in that.
100% same. Like, I feel like I'm just finally, and I think maybe we talked a little bit about this at the party. I feel like I'm just finally getting to a place where I'm doing less proving.
Yes.
Like, obviously we're all performing all the time. Shout out to Judith Butler. But like feeling like the performance that I am occupying is more natural. And maybe sometimes I'm not super bubbly, effervescent Kimberly. And sometimes people catch me out in the world and it's like, okay, you have the choice. Like, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to turn it up? Are you going to be like how you know? And so just being comfortable enough and confident enough to be like, you're gonna like Kimberly however she shows up, and I'm gonna be kind and I'm gonna be gracious, but maybe I don't have to be YouTube Kimberly when we're in Starbucks.
Yes.
All right. So I also, I wanted to talk to you about dieting as a form of assimilation. So I remember growing up, I have a curvier body, and in Black spaces, my body was fine and maybe celebrated in Black spaces. And then you go to school, which is predominantly white, or you do your extracurriculars that are predominantly white, and immediately you're the biggest, you feel like you're the biggest person. And why are my thighs like this? And why is my butt and all of this? And even people are making comments on it. All kinds of people have made inappropriate comments about my body. And so that's when I learned early that in order to show them that I am doing my best, I am going to talk about the diet that I'm on, starting when I was like in 4th grade. I would be like, yeah, like I can't eat that. I don't eat that. Just so y'all know, like I recognize I'm different.
Yes. I mean, I think you're really pointing to, I'm kind of like realizing something as you're talking. I mean, so diet talk, like that kind of self-critical, like self-surveillance talk is totally part of diet culture. It's totally, it plays a lot of different social roles. Like in feminine spaces, it's a way that women kind of connect.
Yes.
And it's almost like a coded language, or it's like I might be talking about food, but I'm actually talking about how I'm on board with normative social expectations.
Yeah.
I'm on board with like patriarchal ideas of beauty. I'm on board with the idea that surveilling myself and what I eat is expected of me, and I am willing to accept that role.
Right.
Like there's sort of like, I mean, there is kind of like this subtweeting that's happening as you're having that conversation, which I think you're pointing out, and actually a dimension that I never really thought about, which is like, it's a deflective conversation.
Yeah.
It's sort of a way to like, it's a way to kind of like push away scrutiny. It's a way that you can kind of say like, I'm going to offer this thing, which is a little bit humiliating, in hopes that you won't like, that you'll judge me better, that you'll judge me in a more humane way, you know?
100%. Like there's this idea of code switching, right? Where it's like in though predominantly white spaces you speak this way, in Black spaces you speak a different way. But I think that that's kind of a part of it, right? Where it's like I might feel comfortable in my body in this space, but in this other space I need to make sure that oh, I'm not comfortable, and hopefully you will accept the fact that I recognize that my discomfort is palpable and I'm trying, and absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a lot of different, like, I love that you brought that up. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that like marginalize people. And again, for me, I think this is obviously a conversation kind of about fatness, but like, for me, it really sits in like a racial place, in my body. When I think about all the little things that people of color, BIPOC, have to do, like the little kind of like it's almost like that little token that you have to just like put on the like the, what do you call this, like the altar of whiteness. Like we just have to kind of be like, just put our little token there, like I'm safe, I'm down with this agenda, like I'm okay, I'm not a threat. And it's like, I think dieting, this is what's so interesting about, like, I argue and I strongly feel that people of BIPOC and white people do dieting for really different reasons. I mean, some of them overlap, but there's some significant racial differences that I think are important to articulate, right? So like when a white person is dieting, they're kind of signaling that like, that they basically that they want to be in line with like normative expectations, right? Like a lot of us do that, but like, right, those are their white expectations. So it's like I'm in line with the expectations. I am here to get sort of as much privilege as possible as a white person that I can, and then which all white people are expected to do. But I think with BIPOC, it's like there's a slightly different thing, because it's like we're signaling that we are on board with the white beauty standard when we diet. So it's like, it's always kind of, there's always like that extra, I mean, diet culture in general is designed to sort of humiliate and dehumanize. But I think when you're a BIPOC dieting, there's always that kind of extra edge of that extra humiliation that we're already always kind of experiencing all the time. So I think that, like, for me, and the last thing I want to say about that, and this is like kind of a deep cut, but I think it's useful to discuss, is like, I think right? Like for me as a fat woman in a, like, actually, let me back up and say, like, I had this realization a few years ago. I was talking to a colleague who is a white woman, who's also fat. And, you know, she was like, God, I get so much hate online. I feel like you get so little compared to like the hatred that I get. It just comes, it's just so intense. And she's like, I wonder why that is, like, whatever. And I was like, what? I'm like, my instinct is it's because as a white woman, when you're fat in a fat hating culture, you are taking your uterus out of the white nation building process. And I'm not. I can never produce a white child. So it's like, so when I'm like out here being fat as a brown woman, it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Like we're expecting you to just churn out some undesirables / some children who would probably want to overthrow the government also, or whatever. I mean, not the government, but like the culture. So it's like you being out of the race is not as personally offensive to us as like a white supremacist nation as if a white woman does it, you know?
Now, this is interesting. So just to underscore, you come from a Mexican immigrant family.
Yes.
And do you really think that you get less hate online than a white fat woman? Do you think?
I think at that time, I think so. Like, I feel like at that time I did. And I mean, it was kind of shocking to me, like people who had come into fat activism or whatever at the same time, who were white colleagues, they did experience a level of scrutiny that I did not. Like, it was like, I mean, in general, just in terms of like, I'm not even talking about like general cultural sentiment. I'm talking about volume of like hateful comments. They did get orders of magnitude more hatred than I did, at least at that time. And I haven't done like a temperature check now to see if I still feel that way. But at that time, I was like, I literally could observe it. Like I was like, wow, people really do not like you. Like, and especially, and I think in particular, I will say there's kind of two kinds of hate. There's like the hate coming from the people who largely identify the same way as you and have like one or two different, very strong political belief differences. And they're going to like get in there about that. And then there's kind of like a lot of white straight men who are, you know, kind of like basically really hate fat activists. And I found that I was in that category, I was like significantly outpaced by my white colleagues. And I was like, this is very clearly about reproductive politics, it feels like to me. You know what I mean?
You know, for some reason, I'm going to think about this more, but that might make sense to me because I feel like I absolutely learned to hate my body from white girls and white women. Like, I do think I definitely feel like those were like the strongest input. So I think that could absolutely make sense that like that in the white community, like the virulent like anger would be a lot stronger there. That's super interesting. I wanted to talk to you about the difference between body positivity and fat liberation. I feel like we hear the term body positivity a lot, and maybe so much now that it's been rendered meaningless. But when you talk about fat liberation, what are you striving toward?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I use them interchangeably because it's just like that's the prevailing language. And I just found myself explaining like fat activism, fat liberation, like it was like the same questions. It'd be like, what is that? And then is it okay for me to use the word fat? And I was like, I'm tired of having this. I need to like put my energy elsewhere. So I decided, I made a moment. I was like, I'm not going to die on this hill. This is not the hill I'm dying on. So I just want to sort of preface it and say like, I think there was a time where I was like really fighting to make the distinction in a more public way. And now I'm like, that can be a distinction that I have internally that I know. Yeah. Like I know I'm a fat liberationist but my field is like body positivity. Like that's how people talk about it. So I just want to sort of say that and put that out there. But I will say in terms of like, you know, they are fundamentally different politics. Body positivity definitely came out, though the phrase body positivity has been around a long time. Body positivity as we know it as like kind of a movement really came out of fat activism. And so like, you know, I mean, there's, oh my God, there's so many things I want to share. I mean, briefly, right, fat activism dates back, as I was mentioning earlier, to the 1960s. You know, like with the establishment of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And also before that, I sort of just recently found out that in 1967 or 68, there was something called a fat in Central Park where like 500-ish like plus size people got together and like burned diet books.
Yeah. Late 60s. Everybody was in upheaval in the late 60s. People were like, fuck this shit. Like, we're knocking all of this shit over.
Yes, totally. So yeah, like, so that happened. And then very quickly kind of, so it went from like kind of fat acceptance and then very quickly a sort of radical offshoot from that organization, from the acceptance movement emerged. And it was mostly women. And they were like, you know, hey, I don't want you to accept me. I want to be free. And I think also because it was like women who were fat who were leading the sort of the radicalization of the movement. They were like, listen, I'm hate. And then, again, this is the 60s and early 70s. They're like, I'm being hated for being a woman. A lot of them were also lesbians. I'm hated for being a lesbian. I'm hated for being fat. Like a single issue movement that's about acceptance is not appealing to me. And it's important to like note that the person who started the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance was a straight man who was also white and thin.
Yeah.
He was largely like started it in honor of his wife who experienced a lot of weight discrimination. She was a plus size woman. Anyway, so like kind of moving forward, it quickly became kind of a much more radical movement. And a lot of the tenets of fat liberation were directly borrowed from Black power ideology. Like literally even some of like the imagery, when you're looking at those archival images from like the 60s, what became something called the fat underground, they even have like a chubby little fist. It's like very, you know what I mean? So it's like the iconography, the language, they ended up creating something called the Fat Liberation Manifesto, which largely outlines like stop treating us like we're not human. Doctors, the same demands that fat people have now, right? Doctors need to stop like literally like prescribing eating disorders. They need to take us seriously as patients. We need to have access to clothing. We need to have access to dignity, right? It was a pretty simple, document, I would say, in terms of the demands. And it was a human rights, movement, really. And I think it's important to understand, like any human rights movement, which the fat liberation movement is largely going back to the three-dimensional model of like oppression, right? It's largely like intrapersonal, interpersonal, institutional. Human rights movements are about institutional change. They're about like, we need to change society to create a reality where like people aren't dying and getting sick and being refused humanity based on their identity or their body. And then I would say body positivity is kind of hitting on this first element, this intrapersonal. How do I feel about myself?
Yeah.
And I think they both interact with all three elements. When I think about the fundamental differences between the two, the fundamental difference in the question, body positivity has, how do I feel better about myself?
Yeah.
And I would say that fat activism is, how do I change society to create access for people in larger bodies? And I think like my critique remains and consistently has been, positivity is not a political resource. You do not go to like the government and ask for more positivity, right? Right, like you don't like agitate for more positivity. And I think it's important to understand, right, in the hierarchy of what people need, right? Like I think the demand of positivity, and I think the demand for positivity, I will say, is not just about like, how do I feel about myself, but like, how does society sort of treat me, and like, how can I be seen positively and no matter what body I have? So I don't want to super reduce body positivity, but I will say, right, fat activism is like, doctors don't kill fat people, right? And then like up here, it's like, I want society to treat me, like have more positive regard for my body.
Yeah.
So you can see in like the hierarchy of like those needs, like medical care is a basic need, and positivity is more of a spiritual, need that's higher up in the hierarchy of like human needs,
Yeah, I think that that was a great articulation of some of the nuances there. And I don't really mean to shit on body. I mean, I did mean to shit on it, but you did actually, you underscored some really important things here. It does matter how you feel about yourself. And it does matter whether or not you can move through the world and not walk down the street and have people hurl insults and shit at you. Like that actually is important in people's everyday lives, for sure.
Yes.
I want to talk about wellness culture now.
Mm.
Like that is the thing. And, it started from self care, and then we got the explosion of wellness culture. And now wellness culture has regressed, or maybe this is like the natural progression into like just full on diet culture. And so,
Mm.
how do we do wellness without perpetuating diet culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually pretty simple. Like, I think a lot of people feel like it's like this extremely complicated thing, but in fact, it isn't, right? Basically, what you do is like you separate weight from health outcomes. And like, right, it's really hard to do that, like in our current medical paradigm, because we're told that those two things are the same thing. But I want to say, I mean, I know I've been like sharing a lot of data points, but I think it is useful to
Oh,
reflect,
we
right?
love
Like,
data here. We love
okay, good. I mean, I have a critique of like over reliance on research. I'm like, we know some things. We don't need a researcher to tell us this stuff. But I know for a lot of people, it is valuable to have these data points. But anyway, so this paper, I always reference this paper, but it talks about how, using the BMI as an indicator of health, like 1 in 4 Americans has the wrong information about their health, right? Like in general, we're like doctors are kind of taught to like look at your weight and just assess whether or not you even need any follow-up tests, right? Like if you walk into a doctor in a slender body, no matter what, like you could have lung cancer, you could have like any number of things, right? They're not even going to ask you anything. They're not even going to like express concern unless you articulate some concern. Versus if you're in a larger body, they're going to presume that you have multiple chronic illnesses and that you should lose weight, which, right, again, the research on this is so clear, right? Like it's frustrating, right? Because doctors, if you talk to a regular doctor, you're going to hear a very antiquated belief system that is not based in data when it comes to weight. Like what we know about weight is that when a person is on a diet, when they try to lose weight by controlling food, it does not lead to weight loss long term. It often leads to weight loss in the short term, right? Because what happens is your body, you start starving your body, calorically removing food, which your body, like at first, it sort of is in the information gathering stage. This is when your body loses weight kind of in the very short run. So maybe like the first, let's say 6 months. But quickly, it might even be less than that. Quickly, your body assimilates this information and is like, I am being starved. It immediately experiences as a threat to its survival. And it does what a body is meant to do, a genius, beautiful, amazing evolutionary thing, which is like, we're going to do everything we can to save this person's life. So people experience this like loss of results as like very disappointing and as a failure, but it's actually an example of your body acting successfully. So like again, long term, what happens is that the weight is not successfully repressed. Dieting is not correlated with weight loss long term. It is correlated with depression, anxiety, decreased cognition, decreased energy, and a 25% increased likelihood of developing an eating disorder. So like there is nothing, like when we think about any of the outcomes that people are looking for when they're dieting, the research does not bear out that any of those outcomes occur. In general, what we're seeing with people who quote unquote successfully maintain weight suppression, they have eating disorders.
Right.
And I think like what's really difficult is like, in our culture, when you're a woman, it's almost like you got an eating disorder, like good job, right? Like you have the discipline to like give yourself an eating disorder,
Yes, 100% for women, like eating disorders are celebrated. But I will say, because I have dated men who were super like gym people and like obsessed with this needs to be cut. Like I'm only eating oatmeal today. And I've told people, you have an eating disorder. But
Yes.
but they're not going to listen to me say you have an eating disorder, because everywhere else they go, people are like, discipline. Oh my God, look at that cut, look at that V, oh my muscles. Like, how did you transformate, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's you can't counteract it with like, these behaviors are unhealthy when there's so much positive, like
I know.
external validation everywhere.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, like, totally yes. And I think, like, I want to get back to your question and say, like, in reality, what we know, I mean, okay, you know what? I have to share a couple more data points. And it is like, in general, when a patient, again, we know from research, when a patient is advised to lose weight, the likeliest outcome is an immediate binge.
Mm,
This leads to the immediate, like, kind of like the action reaction. You go into a doctor and you're told to diet or lose weight. The likeliest thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a binge after that appointment.
interesting.
So it's like, it's really important to understand that restriction literally leads to binging. Like, these are opposite sides of the same coin. People think that, like, binging is like some kind of crazy, weird, wild, horrible behavior. It only happens among dieters. Like, only dieters binge.
This
And
is
it's a completely natural biological thing. Like, your body basically kind of overrides your brain and is like, we're in survival mode. I do not care. You need to get as much food in you as possible. It might be painful, it might be shameful, but like, we're just in here trying to save your life. And so, like, binging is again another example of the body doing exactly what it's supposed to do when it's perceiving a threat, and we perceive it as pathological and insane and terrible, but it's just a natural response. I'm just saying, like, this is when we talk about, like, the ball being passed back and forth, dieting and binging go together like milk and cookies. Like, they are the twins
oh
to the behavior,
100%. It's so interesting. I've been trying to figure out a way to talk about this without perpetuating fat phobia, because I, for years, was just a secret, like, shame binge eater. Like, wake up in
Mm.
the middle of the night and, like, just eat, like, pig out, like, eat, like, so much. It was compulsive. Like, I could not control
Yeah.
it. And truly not until, and I know people are so fucking tired of me talking about fucking Adderall, but I will say not until I decided to treat my ADHD, and there's a connection between ADHD and narcolepsy and binge eating disorder. It's not until I started taking medication did that impulse, like, was I able to control it? And so
Mm.
it's so, the quality of my life has improved so much, because I would feel like the physical sensation of, you're fine, you're good, you are full, you don't need to eat anymore. But there was something in my brain that was overriding the thing, where, like, I, like, literally could not stop. And then there's a shame spiral. And I do absolutely believe that diet culture and the culture of, like, being obsessed with your body and the body dysmorphia that's, like, everywhere, I do feel like that absolutely contributed to the spiral of binging all of the time, and it took medication for me to get out of that cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, like, someone I met, who I was working with, and she had never dieted her entire life, and then went to medical school and started getting a lot of fat phobic messages in medical school, and then started dieting, and for the first time in her life, which she thought was healthy behavior, right? Because that's what she was told, and then for the first time in her life, started exhibiting binging and was very confused. Like, literally, she was like, I would wake up in the middle of the night and bake a cake, and then I would eat it with my hands, then I would hate myself, then I would throw the cake away, then I would eat the cake out of the garbage. And she was like, I was like, something is going on, what is wrong with me? She literally did not see the connection between the two behaviors. She thought, I'm eating in a healthier way, and so this binging thing is like a totally out of nowhere, like, what's going on? And it wasn't until she kind of started working through the dieting and, like, not dieting anymore, that she learned that these two things go together, right? She didn't have some kind of like wild binge eating disorder. She was a dieter who was doing what dieting ultimately leads you to doing, which is like binging. But for real, like getting back to the question, I think for like essentially what we know from research, what really, really helps people long term is when they do not attach weight outcomes to their health oriented behavior. So every single person, regardless of their body size and regardless of like whether an activity like meditating, walking, hanging out with friends, right? Like whether or not these things lead to weight loss, that these things absolutely benefit human beings. And a lot of times they don't lead to weight loss, right? And so when we divorce the weight outcome, because like all of we're measuring health outcomes through weight. Even research, like academic people, like scientists who are 30 years into the field and should know better, are literally reducing health outcomes to weight. So for example, if you have a study where, and I see this all the time in papers, right? If you have a study that's like literally only looking at weight loss as a metric of whether or not this is a health promoting behavior, you're missing tons of data. Right. And I will say, like, I think what's great about divorcing weight outcomes from healthful behavior, like we definitely know humans benefit when they're in nature. We know they benefit when their like heart rate is up. We know they benefit when they eat like green leafy vegetables, when they drink a little bit more water, when they get a little bit more sleep. We know all of these things benefit human beings regardless of their body size. And I think there's a lot of things that really aren't going to get your heart rate up or do any of the things that like people associate with like aerobic weight loss oriented behavior that are also really good for your health. Like enjoying your food, like literally when you are in a good mood, your body absorbs more nutrition. They have research on this. It's like nuts. When you feel safe, you're likelier to have a better and more improved immune system. Mm-hmm. When you literally are just like, touching flowers, doing something that makes you feel happy, there are health benefits to that as well. So it's like, I think when we really take the weight stuff out of it, we open up this like wide world of what is available to humans and that absolutely are health promoting.
Yeah. I think that makes perfect sense. I feel like the focus on weight means that we're trying to, put Band-Aids on things that require like large scale lifestyle interventions. And lifestyle is not just about trying to starve yourself. It's like, are you having fun? Like, are you happy? Are you spending time with your family? Are you going on walks? Like, yeah, I think that that's a really great point there.
Yeah.
The final thing that I wanted to talk about was, or one of the final things is, I had a little bit of a chuckle when you talked about in your book trying to like, on your dating profiles, like kind of like allude to a feminist identity, but you don't want to be like too feminist because
yes,
because that scares people away. And I feel like women, particularly women who date men or have sex with men, like understand that struggle. And I just thought that was really hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, it's just like, I mean, I've had so many moments and realizations about dating. One big one, which I think I don't know, I share this with like everyone I meet. So I'm sorry if I like already told you this at the party. Like one of the biggest moments for me that like kind of blew my mind when it came to like dating was I realized I read this paper that found that straight women and straight men. So straight women are like socialized to date based on educational compatibility. Uh-huh. But the reason that straight women and straight men get advanced degrees are for vastly different reasons. So straight women tend to get education in order to change the world. Straight men tend to get like education to make more money. So if you're dating and stacking your dates based on class compatibility, essentially, right? Like, what you're going to end up with is a fundamental values difference, right? Because literally he's out there like building the patriarchy that you're like behind him trying to deconstruct. Mm-hmm. And that is not how a marriage works long-term. Like that, I mean, not necessarily a marriage, but that's not how like a coupledom works. And so once I realized that I had been socialized to stack dating potential based on education and that this was fundamentally leading to long-term incompatibility, I just was like, you know what, I'm just gonna like chuck this whole like intellectual strategy thing that I've been told to do, and I'm just gonna listen to my body. when I feel comfortable with a person, I'm going to lean into that. And that immediately, of course, like led to totally different outcomes, you know?
Oh, 100. Oh, I think that this is so good and hits on so many of the conversations that are so pervasive. So I feel like right now we're having so many conversations about women and the lack of marriageable, men out there for straight women. And, marriageability is based on, do you have the ability to provide? Did you go to college? Like all of these other things. And like, we just are all coming out so frustrated. And so I have realized, I've talked to people about how I have no problem dating somebody who makes less money, who like, or whatever, because first of all, my needs are not financial. And so like, I don't really, but I also don't want to have to spend my days and nights arguing about feminism. I don't want
Yes. No, and I love that you're bringing this up. And like, I'm literally like, I'm just dying inside with joy right now. Cause like, I think this is what I've been telling my girlfriends, right? Is I'm like, I understand the struggle, right? Like it's real, all of that. I mean, I don't want to belittle anyone's experience of what's happening. I will say, however, that like, there are like our foremothers fought for us to be able to have work, and now we're outperforming men. And I'm like, what? They fought so hard so that money would never have to be a point of compromise for women. And I'm like, why in the world, when we're outperforming men, are we still allowing like the whole idea of like the marriageable like straight man is literally based on women not having the right to even own a library card in their own name, let alone a credit card or a mortgage, let alone get a master's degree or a PhD or like any kind of degree. And so I'm just like, why would we spit in the face of these women who like literally didn't have any rights? And that's why they were acting this way. They had to act this way because of literal legislated dehumanization. And we're out here like outperforming, making more money, like getting more homes for single women, right? I mean, it's like, why in the world would we allow money to be like, if money doesn't need to be something for your survival, you should not be dating based on it. Like that's how I feel, you know?
Okay, so I'm Black. So it's like, because Black women have always worked, right? And like the work has been compulsory, like, and so I do not begrudge Black women who want to find a partner that will make their lives easier, particularly when it comes to shouldering the financial burden. Like, it takes more money to live, in 20, like it just takes, right? Like people are so I am so sensitive and empathetic to that. But I do think that we do have to think really hard about there's trade-offs. When you're chasing money, you're gonna have to trade off something else. And I have found that over and over again so many times where it's like men who I think are professionally accomplished and make a lot of money and are high achievers and ambitious and all of that. When we start talking about, man, this is like hitting close to home. I might set this out in the public version of this. But when we start talking about capitalism and the exploitation of poor people, and they're just like, well, it is what it is. And it's like, wait. But we're acknowledging, right, that it doesn't have to be this way, right? That those are policy choices, and that because you have power, because of your socioeconomic position, you have the means to like actually make some inroads and I'm like, what is like, this is crazy. Like, it is just so, it's incomprehensible to me that people who have access to extra resources would not want to do anything to use those resources to help the people who have less than them. And like so often, like that is what you're running into with the the high achieving, high earning men. And those are like fundamentally, those are our values are misaligned there. That's really hard.
100%. I mean, I'm on the same page on like, I don't judge other people, but I'm like, if you're someone like me who just kept hitting the same wall
Yeah.
and you're like, I need a different outcome, I don't want to compromise
Yeah.
on those values, like there are people like me out there, right? Like, I'm just like, if you're that person and you don't need that income for survival, or like, whatever life that you'd like to live, like, don't let social norms and like gender norms get in the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're not going to listen, Virgie. But I hear you. I'm just going to tell you, they're not going to listen. But I think that you're like, but I agree with you. I mean, it takes a lot to buck social norms and like deconstruct that stuff. But
Yes.
yeah, like if you're frustrated, there's probably a reason why you're encountering the same frustrations time and again. Oh, and that data point about are wanting to achieve for different reasons. I mean,
Yeah.
that cemented something like that I've been feeling, but I appreciate you succinctly putting that together because 100%. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I don't even know, like, what was oh yeah, okay. I think I answered the question about dating. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you answered this. Okay. So finally, you're author, activist, scholar. You've been working for a long time. You have a great oeuvre, body of work. And so do you feel now that you have done enough, put enough out in the world where you can take a step back and like breathe and chill out for a little bit?
I mean, I'm trying. Like, I mean, I think that, it is hard. I think, and you've alluded to this, like, my work is really meaningful. It's really joyful. And sometimes it is hard to remember it's work though. Like, it's like, you know what I mean? I still am trying to learn how to parse out, like, for example, like, this can be fun and it can also be work. Like, there's a difference between like, this is fun and not work. This is relaxation and not work.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, I'm sure you know about this hustle where you're like, okay, I have to travel for work, but I'm going to take that one day or that 5 hours and I'm going to like treat myself to like something, but it's still work. Like, you're literally just like cheating yourself into believing that you're having like a mini vacation or something. It's like, no, a layover is not a vacation.
Yeah.
A layover where you read a magazine is not a vacation. So I think I'm still learning how to like stop doing that. But I think I'm getting better. Like, I will say, like, I've had some girlfriends really step in and kind of like be like, I mean, like, I was visiting after Laverne's party, like, I stayed in New York with my friend for a few days, and she kind of had like mandatory like bath. She was like, she's like, I'm going to give you a bath bomb. I'm going to give you this face mask and you're going to go into that bath and you're going to take the bath.
Yeah.
And she kind of like really, I think one of the things I feel happy that I have like, a few girlfriends who are like this. They really kind of break down. They're like, this is how much work you actually did today.
Yeah.
So I think another thing is like, I'm like, oh, I just did 2 things. Like, no, you did 75 things.
Oh, but you know what? Okay, can I just say that something that has been so helpful to me, I've been trying to be just much more thoughtful about how I'm organizing my day, is I, have the to-do list every day, but I also have the accomplished list. And so every single time I do anything, if it's return an email, pick up a phone call, whatever, I write it down under the accomplished list. And
oh my God, I love this. Okay.
At the end of the day, I'm talking to the person I'm dating, and, because sometimes they'll ask me, especially when you work for yourself, somebody will be like, so what'd you do today? And I'm like, I didn't do anything. And he's like, all day you didn't do anything. And so now I can like go back and be like, I run a business. Oh, I forgot that like I did this and I did, and it makes me feel a lot better and not disappointed,
Oh
when
my
I
gosh.
like, I didn't save the world today. No, but like I did this.
Oh, I love that. I love an accomplishment list. And honestly, there's like, that's like, I mean, literally, that's like a tool I have in therapy where when I'm working on things that I'm having difficulty with, like, he just makes me list out like everything that I've done, like, ever that has been like even a tiny accomplishment, like in that arena. So I love this. I bet there's like even like a Psychology Today article. See, I'm like turning it into work. I mean, okay, but yes, I love this accomplishment list idea. That sounds really good. I'm going to try that.
Yeah, it's been truly like changing my mindset, because at the end of the day I used to go to sleep and be like disappointed, like, oh, like I didn't do, but now I'm like, oh, like, and I did, and that's good enough. Okay, finally. I forgot to mention this. You call yourself a fashionista in the book. And so I am wondering, how do you reconcile a love for clothes, a love for aesthetics, looking good, feeling good, having your own style, with an understanding that, like, that world is so racist, classist, fat phobic, like, you know, like all of these things of like, how do you balance joy, but also recognizing that, like, this thing that I love can also be a perpetuator, a vehicle of some really harmful paradigms.
Yeah, I mean, I think I reconcile it in the same way that, like, I think all of us have to kind of reconcile that on some level, like all the time. So I think that I'm whatever everyone else is doing, I know I'm doing some version of that. But I think also a couple of things that come to mind. Like, first of all, is I do get a lot of my clothes from people whose businesses are really wonderful, who do have really amazing politics, who really are committed to doing innovative and groundbreaking breaking work in the plus size space and the inclusive sizing space. So I feel like a lot of the pieces, I'm just like, wow, like I feel good. Every part of this feels good. Like they're thoughtful about the production, they're thoughtful about the fit, they're thoughtful about the representation. And this is like a really beautifully, thoughtfully made garment. So I think there's a lot of that. I'm also someone who has always loved like vintage and thrift,
Yeah.
which is definitely part of kind of like and swapping with my fat friends. So like there's a lot of like kind of anti-capitalist, like reuse, like sort of ecologically minded practices that are built into that. And I think the last thing I'm going to say is like, and I know that a lot of my plus size friends do not agree with me on this one, but I actually really enjoy the hunt. Like even before there's been a massive explosion in availability of plus size clothing,
Mhm.
admittedly mostly in the 1X to 3X category, which is unfortunate because like the average American woman is a 2X.
Mm.
So it is a bummer that this is considered like inclusive. I'm like, what
Yeah.
does it mean? What do you mean inclusive? You're literally just making clothes for the average American woman. But anyway, all that to put that aside. Like even before the proliferation of making clothing for actual American women's bodies, like I loved that feeling of going in a thrift store knowing there was like two things that I could find, you know, and that I would like look for them. So I think like I got a lot of meaning from that process. So I mean, like that's probably just like some weird resiliency thing, but it brings me a lot of joy and delight, sort of going in. But I know a lot of plus size women find that very same scenario extremely alienating and embarrassing. So I know I don't like, I'm not like, and I understand that. So like those are kind of like my thoughts on the reconciliation.
Yeah. Do you think social media is what's propelled the explosion, as you mentioned, of like more size inclusive branding and like the popping up of more brands that are specifically targeted toward women who are plus size?
Yeah, I do think it's social media. And I think it's important to name that it's like it's not only like it's not only just like, so I think first of all, before social media, literally fat people, our representation was in the hands of fat hating thin people.
Yeah.
So like every single portrayal that we saw of a fat person was like made by a fat phobe. And then social media completely usurped that. And we all of a sudden had the means of production of like, you know, of image production in our own hands. And it was really that, like going back to Fashionista is like a reference to a live journal that I would say literally kind of birthed body positivity. It was like mostly queer fat women who just would take OOTDs, outfit of the day, and would share it. And they would like admire each other and share like, I love this, I love what you did, or they would share tips. And then all of a sudden this live journal got like, you know, what do we call this? Like it got what is that like colonial word that I'm thinking of? It got discovered, you know what I mean? By
Oh,
like
okay.
outside people. Like, it got discovered by like straight thin white people. And and I think immediately, in a lot of ways, in the same way that like a lot of times when straight culture and queer culture interact, like straight people are like, inspiration, I want to consume you, you
Yeah.
know, versus like seeing that these people are creating community and meaning and like and lifting each other up in a homophobic culture that's like bringing them down. Like people from the outside are like, oh my god, these women have so much confidence, you know. So anyway, they're very complicated, but so Fashionista like was that blog, you know, that really led to a lot of proliferation of like seeing plus size women in cute outfits, being confident, determining their own lives. And like, I think that because no one had ever seen that before, it was like, you mean I could be fat and like wear an outfit that I like and like have relationships, like be happy and smile. I think all of that, I think that in combination, like that led to empowerment of beyond plus size women. And I think then that created, and social media also created a platform where plus size women could talk directly to companies and have like an absolute, like, you know, like they could have a share of like the input on what was happening in these.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. There's like 30 more things that I could ask.
Yes.
We'll have to do a part 2. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me, Virgie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was so fun chatting. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, that's it. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. Tell me what you think. Who should I interview next? I'm always open to suggestions. That's it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.